Well, welcome everyone to the webinar. We're very happy to offer this topic to you as a newly licensed professional engineer. You've proved you're worthy of a professional license and now you have to use it, right? So what does that mean exactly? So we are the Maryland Society of Professional Engineers. You may remember our organization from newly licensed engineering ceremony that we hold annually at the Engineers Club in Baltimore. We're the only organization that includes all engineering disciplines that can be licensed. So in a real way, we represent you and we protect the license from any sort of attack that may come from legislation or regulation. Although we cannot offer any legal advice, we can provide you with some professional advice to help you make ethical decisions about the use of your license. My name is Jim Mirabili. I am a licensed professional engineer in Maryland. I practice electrical power engineering. I also teach a PE review class. So some of you maybe took my class if you're an electrical engineer. I've been an officer in Maryland Society of Professional Engineers for several years. I've held the position of secretary, president-elect, president, past president, and now delegate to national. So a few housekeeping items before I get into introducing our panel. We have a very large group today, so I'm going to ask that you listen to the discussion, jot down any questions that you may have. They're probably going to be addressed during the conversation that we have today. If your questions aren't answered, we'll give you an email address at the end so you can send us any questions that you may have. They're going to be important, but we really want to make sure that we get through the whole discussion today without going down too many rabbit holes. You may have some very specific questions about things that are going on in your career, and although they're very important, we've got a pretty jam-packed agenda this hour, and so we really want you to listen to the experts and then maybe send us any questions you might have. Today we have with us a number of professional engineers who are joining us on a panel to have an informative discussion about the topic of licensure, including signing and sealing documents. I'm going to ask our panelists questions throughout the hour so that we can get a discussion going on various topics. And before we get into that, I do want to, let's see. There we go. I want to give a shout out to our annual partners. Our platinum partners are BG&E and Pepco Holdings. Our gold partner is EBL Engineers, and our bronze partners, ATCS, Chaberton Energy, Daff McCune Walker, Frederick Ward Associates, Gorov Slate, and Luminous. So we thank our annual partners. They help us with supporting our program throughout the year and allow us to have occasionally a free webinar like this one. So thank you to our partners. So now I want to turn it over to our panelists, and let's have our panelists introduce themselves. And so just to tee this up, if you give me your name, your engineering discipline, what type of work you do, and then tell me how long you've been involved with Maryland Society of Professional Engineers, and perhaps what positions you've held. So let's go down the list. Let's start with Victoria.
Hi, I'm Victoria Ballestero. I have been a professional licensed engineer for about 5 years. I work for ATCS, and I lead up our Prince George's County office. ATCS is a multidisciplinary engineering firm, but my team here in Largo focuses on land development engineering. I've been involved with MDSPE for about 10 years, I think. I've served as secretary, president, and now I am past president, so I have a much less responsibility, and I just get to do the fun stuff like this.
All right,
Karen?
let's kick it over to Karen.
Right, I'm Karen Moran. I recently retired from Whitman Record and Associates. My discipline is civil engineering, and my career was spent doing water and wastewater engineering for municipal agencies in the DC, Maryland, Virginia area. I've been a member of MDSPE since I moved here from upstate New York in about 1998. While I was in New York, I was state society president there, and I was a regional vice president for the National Society. I've been on the Maryland board for, I would guess, about 10 years now.
Bobby?
Hi, I'm Bobby Geis. I work for RK&K presently. Going back a few years from that, I got my degree in mechanical engineering in 2008 from University of Maryland, and I received my PE license in 2015. So I guess you could say I've been practicing professional engineering for 8 years. My specialty is natural gas, but I also manage a variety of utility projects as a project manager for RK&K. And currently with MDSPE, I've been involved for a little over a year now as a director at large, and I also serve on the membership committee.
Yep, thank you, Bobby. Andrew?
Hi, yes, my name's Andrew Brown. I also work with ATCS. I'm a civil engineer. I got my career start sort of in construction inspection and geotechnical engineering, and then worked my way into land development, site civil. And we do work, as Victoria mentioned, throughout the Maryland, well, and beyond. But my specialty is the state of Maryland. So I've been on the MDSPE board for 5 years now, served as secretary, president-elect, and now I am currently serving as the active president. And it's been a privilege, and excited to be part of the panel here today.
Great, thank you to our panelists. We're going to have we have a lot of experience on this panel, so we'll have a lot of good discussion, and hopefully you'll get some enrichment from that discussion. The presentation comes from a document prepared by National Society of Professional Engineers. And this document, if you haven't received it already, we'll send you a copy of it. And we thought that it would make for a very good webinar, and especially a very good panel discussion with people who have kind of lived through using their license, and to offer you some information about that process. So the mission and vision of National, a world where the public can be confident that engineering decisions affecting their lives are made by qualified and ethically accountable professionals, and the mission to foster licensed professional engineers in service to society. So I think the mission and vision really sets the tone for what we're trying to do here. What makes a PE different from a degreed engineer who's not licensed? Right, that's always a question that we ask ourselves. PE has passed some tests, but more importantly, a PE is bound by our ethics code and has a professional responsibility, and we take that pretty seriously. So a quote from the Maryland Ethics: as a professional engineer, you have an extraordinary responsibility to the public. Failure to follow applicable laws and standards of practice can lead to severe consequences. The Maryland Code of Ethics requires licensed professional engineers to maintain current awareness of statutes, regulations, and ethical issues surrounding the profession. And one of those ethical issues is, how do we use our engineer stamp? How do we sign and seal documents? So it's really what we're going to focus on today. I will kick it off with a panelist question. What is an ethical dilemma that's faced the practice of engineering? What were the circumstances, and how was it resolved? So I'm going to send that one to Victoria.
Yeah, Jim, I don't think that we can really have a conversation about professional licensure and ethics in Maryland without looking at history. So Spiro Agnew, who was vice president from 1969 to 1973 under President Richard Nixon, prior to being vice president of the US, he was the Baltimore County executive. And looking back at his history and why his he resigned from vice presidency in 1973, he was investigated by the federal government for taking bribes from contractors and engineers in Maryland. And, as I look at firms like DS Thaler and Associates and Whitman Reckworth and Associates that date back to that time frame and are still around today, a lot of firms aren't still around. And I think that it's largely because the way of doing business at that time, which included bribes and an envelope full of money, it wasn't ethical. It wasn't the way that business should be done. And I think that that's a theme that folks are going to hear as we have this conversation. When we think about ethics and engineering and we think about the obligations of professional licensure, it's a much more gray thing than the envelope of money, but there is also those instances of bad engineering.
Yeah, thank you, Victoria. Yeah, I think that is an example that hits home in Maryland. It's got some age on it, but it still is very relevant. Karen, you came to Maryland from New York. You said, did you know about this when you came to Maryland? What kind of was the what was going on? Not that you
I sort of knew about it. It was well before my time too, but even today, and as Victoria said, WRA didn't play that game, and I think there's still a lot of pride in the way that they conduct their business ethically at all times. And even today, there are instances of, I'll say, political pressure, political solicitation. I once walked into a meeting with a town supervisor in New York where we had just won a project, and he said, "It's nice to meet you, Democrat or Republican?" And I'm like, I got a 50-50 shot here of getting this right, but it's uncomfortable, but it's a reality. And I think you have to be cognizant of that and take it to people above your pay grade, as it were, if you're solicited for something like that.
Yeah, good point. Good point. How do we help the engineers in our firms? Any thoughts on how we can educate them to being responsible with their license? Bobby or Andrew? Victoria?
I was just going to say, I think that engineering, its roots are really an apprenticeship. And for folks who are newly licensed engineers, you took you got your bachelor's degree, or you did an apprenticeship, you did your fundamentals exam, you did more years of apprenticeship, and then you passed your PE exam. And so now the obligation is to reach a hand back and provide apprenticeship and mentorship to those folks that are coming up in your footsteps. And I think it's looking to the senior folks that you're working with and asking them questions. If something doesn't feel right, that should be an inflection point for you to stop and reflect and identify, is there something wrong with this? Again, it's usually not the envelope full of cash. And I think we have lots of great examples as we go through here that ethics and engineering is a much more gray area than that.
Yeah, there's a reason we refer to it as practicing engineering, Jim. Much like law or medicine, engineering is something that we have to exercise our judgment and our skills day in and day out. And just like Victoria said, it takes a while to become a professional engineer, but especially for this audience who are new professional engineers, it may feel a little weird for a while, but now other folks younger than you and less experienced than you are going to look at you as an example to base their practice off of. So it's important to just continue to practice your ethics and good judgment every day.
Agree. And having those conversations, like you said, with coworkers, with supervisors, to make sure that we're navigating these waters carefully and ethically.
Jim, I would also add that MDSPE and NSPE are great resources. to folks, if you ever have a question, there's the board, the Maryland Society of Professional Engineers Board, the Board of Registrations with the Department of Labor. Those are the folks that deliberated on your licensure and who are kind of the guardians of licensure. They're great resources. Reach out to us. You'll have a contact info at the end of the presentation.
Yeah, I agree with that. Excellent advice there, to use the resources that we have in our profession. And that's one thing I think that we're really doing, is creating an engineering community. And we do that in Maryland Society of Professional Engineers. When we have our events, our newly licensed engineering ceremony, we're celebrating newly licensed engineers. We're having our annual conference. So those of you who are newly licensed, you get to renew the first time without any PDH credits. But then your second renewal, you need PDH credits, just to show the board that you're continuing to learn and keep your skills up to date. So I think that's really important. And please look out for our events and join us at those events as we move forward. This is kind of the document that I said is prepared by the National Society of Professional Engineers. Just remember that our license is governed by state laws. You may be registered in Maryland as well as other states that you practice in. We're not, like I said, we're not going to give any legal advice or really ethical advice today, but we are just sharing our experiences as we've lived them from our perspectives. This mentions standard of care. And standard of care is the care and skill used by members of the profession practicing under similar circumstances in the same time period and location. So let me ask Bobby, standard of care, what does that trigger for you? What does it mean from your perspective?
And it's more than just managing a project to a couple of scope statements. You have to think about, how what you're doing impacts the general public. Are you doing something that just meets whatever requirements you need to get something like a permit or to meet a deadline, or are you looking at the big picture and doing something that is constructible, safe, operational in the long term, etc. It's really standard of care, and I know we're going to get to responsible charge in a little bit, but I see those two as twins. As a PE, you need to do due diligence, not just on the technical side, but for the public safety.
Yeah, agree. And Andrew, you have any thoughts?
Yeah, sure. So I think I mean a prominent example of that in one of the counties where where we practice. I think oftentimes we talk about the standard of care is defined as the care and skill ordinarily used by the members of your profession, and I think that's going to be there is an element of we have to meet that charge. But as Bobby said, you can't just turn off your engineering and not be thinking about the bigger picture of how are we just going to be meeting minimum standards, or are we really looking at this with some scrutiny? And I think an example of that in one of the counties where we work, there were retaining wall plans that were approved. They presumably met all minimum standards. But then this resulted in tremendous retaining wall failures. This undermined the foundations of people's homes. And the ripples were felt, significantly. Obviously, there's a huge, that's a failure on the engineering to protect the people that live there. But the ripples were beyond that, and I think we'll get to this later as well. But I mean, sort of anchored in the ethics behind engineering is trust. I mean, that's really when we seal something. There's a certain level of public trust in what we're doing, and when anyone in our profession fails that, that undermines that trust. And so when we look at, not pushing projects to the absolute bare minimum standards. And in this case, it resulted in, countywide changes to the standards that they enforce. And then I think the unfortunate side of that is that then then you end up with situations where maybe there was, an opportunity to use a really great retaining wall design that probably won't be allowed by the county anymore because of the failure of this, this particular engineer. And so, that's just one example of, just meeting minimum standards isn't always sufficient.
Yeah, and I think an important point that you've made there is that standards change, regulations change, and it's up to the engineer to be informed of those changes and to make sure that when they're doing their work, they've applied the most current version of those standards.
Absolutely.
Okay, so this slide is our learning objectives, really for the document, and for today. This will guide our conversation. So we're going to touch on these topics. What does it mean to protect public health, safety, and welfare? What does it mean to be in responsible charge? Why is it important for engineering work to follow a sign and seal process? And what are the benefits to signing and stamping engineering work? So we're going to get into each of these as we move through the next, next few slides. The PE is the equivalent, in our profession, like a medical license or passing the bar exam for lawyers or a CPA license. And you may have noticed, if you go to the Maryland licensure website, you can see all of the professions that are licensed, and it is quite a lot of professions. We come into contact certainly with landscape architects, surveyors, probably in our work, electricians, as well as other craft professions. But even your hairdresser is licensed by the state. So there are a lot of licenses that are in the state. The PE is our equivalent of that. Yet most engineers don't become licensed. So let me ask a panel question. Do you think that this is an issue with our profession? What are some ways that we can promote licensure to the engineering community? And I think also for the audience, I would suspect that most of our audience are licensed engineers. So maybe if you're thinking about this, how would you get your coworkers or engineering associates to consider licensure? So let me kick that one over to Bobby. See if you have any thoughts.
Sure, and I've gotten a chance to get a couple of different perspectives on this, coming from about 14 years working for Baltimore Gas and Electric, which as a corporation and more of an industrial owner type employer, it wasn't really a practice to sign and seal drawings as an engineer. And a lot of engineers rotate around in various departments. They don't always oversee design document generation. And now I'm in a consulting firm where that is our core business. And now I work, it seems like every other person I work with is a licensed engineer. So there's two different ways you can promote it. One is, within the scope of your business, if it's your core means of revenue and oversight, I think that's an easy incentive to demonstrate to younger engineers that if you want to stay as a practicing engineer on this side of the business and this side of the profession, getting your license is part of the natural course. Otherwise, you're probably going to hit some sort of, soft ceiling in your career development, because your clients are going to want to see that they're giving their trust to somebody with a license to manage their projects. On the larger employer side, I think it's a little bit more delicate than that. There's a lot of other factors that may be at play. Maybe engineers get into their career and they realize that they don't want to continue to practice engineering. So I totally understand there's plenty of engineers that get their PMPs, or they go to business school and get their MBAs, or they completely change gears and end up in a career like finance. So Personally, I don't think it's a problem in the profession. I've seen plenty of engineers in my circle pursue their licenses and get them. Um, but I want to make sure that we're promoting it to people that actually want to commit to engineering for the long term.
I think that's a good point.
Let
Go
me
ahead,
offer a
Victoria.
differing opinion there. I would disagree with Bobby. I do think it's a problem to have folks claiming that they're engineers and not having professional licensure. And so as a site civil land development engineer, it is par for the course that you get your professional licensure. We are stamping plans, signing plans all of the time. And it's really often that we hear from clients that our fee is too high, or we hear from clients, well, this engineer said X. And Andrew and I have had at least 3 examples this year of people purporting that they were professional land surveyors or that they were professional engineers, and not just verbally saying that they were engineers, but actually fraudulently stamping plans with a signature. And when I look at something like that happening, that degrades public trust. Our whole profession is based on this idea that when someone drives across the bridge, they are comfortable knowing that a licensed professional with similar credentials to an attorney or a doctor, that the whole premise of our industry is that people are comfortable with our professional knowledge and our professional expertise. And so in my mind, having folks that aren't licensed that can claim that they are, it degrades the public trust. And so, I think that there's one thing that I'd like to raise up to the group to be aware of is that if you do come across folks that are practicing without appropriate licensure, please contact the Department of Labor. There's a really easy form to fill out and let the Department of Labor know, and they can follow up and take appropriate action with those individuals. And I think it's paramount to our industry that we're protecting the profession and we're protecting licensure.
Yeah.
Good point. Anybody want to add anything else? Andrew?
I think, yeah, to sort of bounce off of that, I think, and I think I understand, Bobby's point about, really part of the challenge is, I mean, absolutely a state licensed engineer, that means something. But the part of the problem is that the term engineer is thrown around really loosely across many industries. My brother is a software engineer, and he does great work, but it has nothing to do with signing and sealing drawings. And then, gosh, I hear sales engineer, and there's all these types of roles, which of course demand real skills, but to call them engineers is a little bit misleading there. And so I think part of that differentiation in licensure, saying that you're a professional engineer licensed in the state, that means something different. And maybe you don't have that problem as much, but are you going to want to go to a doctor who doesn't have a medical license to practice? I mean, you don't have a bunch of people calling like, "Oh, I'm a sales doctor." Oh, I don't know any sales doctors, but maybe that's a thing. But that confusion, I think the confusion is thicker in the engineering world. I think
that's actually a great. I'm glad you brought that up, Andrew, because we're talking about engineering today, but it's important to draw parallels to other professions too. And we've talked about the medical profession a couple of times, but I think this is a relatively recent change. So everybody's familiar with MDs, medical doctors, and there are also licensed doctors that are DOs, or doctors of osteopathy. So there's 2 tracks to be a doctor. And then slightly, I guess, in the next tier below, you have advanced care providers, which are typically physician assistants and nurse practitioners, which have diverging paths to getting certified. But in recent times, to be a nurse practitioner, you go through a PhD program. So you graduate with a doctorate of nurse practitioning. So do you refer to yourself, if you're a nurse practitioner who just graduated from that program, do you refer to yourself as doctor? And I'll just leave that as rhetorical. Or do you refer to your NP title?
Yeah.
If I could also add, I think it's incumbent on us as professional engineers to remind our clients, to remind the public, to remind elected officials of the importance of what we do to protect the public health and safety. I think we need to be our own strongest advocates in that regard, because we've seen, well, in consulting, I 100% agree, you need to have a PE license to advance. We've seen an erosion over time of requirements for people in departments of transportation or departments of public works who are in management positions. A lot of them are no longer required to be a PE, whereas they used to be. So I don't want to say we've let it happen to ourselves, but I think we need to toot our own horns more than we do.
I think that's a great point, Karen. And one thing, when I first got my license, the person who gave the speech at my newly licensed engineering ceremony said, when you introduce yourself, say you're a professional engineer. A lot of times we say what our job title is rather than what our career is. And and I try to do that, right? I'm a professional engineer and I practice electrical engineering, right? Something like that. And then, of course, the next question is, well, what's the difference between an electrical engineer and an electrician? And that's when I go get another drink, right? But you're right. We have to educate the public and the community at large. I think engineers don't really sell their services to the consumer market for the most part. I mean, maybe a little bit of structural if you're building a barn or something, but for the most part, we're really in the business community. We're not selling our services to the public, so they don't really know what we do. And I think you're right. It is incumbent on us to educate people about what we do and why a license is important. Yeah, let's see what's next. Okay, responsible charge. This one is, if everyone remembers, NCEES is the organization that creates the PE and the FE exams. They also write a model law for licensure, and most of the states have adopted, if not all of the model law, parts of the model law. And it defines responsible charge as direct control and personal supervision of engineering work. Our organization, NSPE, we have a board of ethical review, so they do a lot of case studies on engineering ethics. They've reinforced that definition. So let me ask this question to the panel. When you see this definition of responsible charge, what does it bring to mind for you? And let's maybe go to Karen.
Thanks, Jim. Well, so for me, in the arena that I practiced in, I was in charge of some large multidisciplinary projects involving structural, electrical, mechanical, geotechnical, architectural, all kinds of disciplines. And to me, responsible charge meant that I needed to have an awareness of the totality of the project, how the different disciplines related, how they might impact each other, essentially to know what I didn't know and to know who knew what I needed to know, so that I would have a level of comfort with the overall design and how all the components fit together. And we evolved at WRA to a point where the engineer in responsible charge was going to sign and seal the cover sheet of a set of drawings, but the discipline engineers and architects in some instances were signing the individual sets of discipline sheets, and I would sign civil documents as well. So I think it's incumbent on us when we're in a responsible charge to know the whole extent and consult with other people as necessary, so that there's a level of comfort if you're ever called to task or to a claim hearing or to court. You need to be able to speak intelligently about the project as a whole.
Yeah, I think that's a good point. And I think, Karen, you were telling me at one point, sometimes a change in one discipline may not obviously be a change in another discipline, but it certainly could affect another discipline.
Yeah, one example from not too long ago was a change that was requested actually in the landscaping of a project. And then that trickled down to some structural impacts because we were changing a shoreline layout. And that trickled down to looking at the electrical supply to some things in that area and saying, I better check with the electrical engineers on this. And as it turned out, because things were being adjusted, it had a major impact on the electrical design. We had to have our sub-consultants go back and redesign and have a change order to the contract, but the client was okay with it because we were meeting, their original request to adjust some landscaping. But you have to, again, that awareness. I've got electrical there. I need to check with them and make sure that there's not a cascading impact here, because there can be.
Yeah, good point. Anybody else have any other thoughts, Andrew?
Sure, yeah, couple thoughts. I think one thing that I'd like to emphasize here on responsible charge and really, whenever you're using your license and adjacent to that, is that the inherent in this is personal knowledge that you're personally certifying as a licensed engineer, individual, not just a employee of a company, that you have responsible charge, that you have the knowledge needed and the qualifications, the skills required, and you've reviewed this to meet, the applicable standards. And so I think one of the, a simple litmus test can sometimes be on that is, do you have ability to make changes to the plans? If you don't have the control and access to make changes, that should be a huge red flag on something that you're sealing. Now that may not work for every scenario, but I think that's a good, sort of rule of thumb to say, are you able to make the changes needed? And obviously this doesn't speak to all of the different, liabilities and things like that. And of course, some things will come back on a company, but at the end of the day, you're never going to be excused that license has your name on it. That number is assigned to you as an individual, and there is there's a personal assurance in that.
And Andrew, that sounds a little scary, maybe to young engineers, that they have that responsibility. What are some skills that you would recommend people maybe develop to build their confidence in their engineering decisions?
Oh, absolutely. So this could be a whole hour in and of itself, really, if we wanted to run down this rabbit hole. But I think I drive that home because I think there's a whole spectrum. When I first got my license, there were some people that I felt like they were like, I'd never get my engineering's license. They're afraid, an angry mob's going to go find their house or something, and all the way to the other end of the spectrum of folks that are just like, oh yeah, you just slap a stamp on there and move it along, and if there's a problem, the company will eat it. And obviously those are pretty extreme perspectives. So I think I say what I say to say, we need to take this seriously, that when you're signing and sealing something, that comes with very real legal ramifications. That's a big deal. I think to develop a level of comfort, though, it kind of comes back to what the panel's already spoken to with that mentorship, understanding, working under other PEs that you trust, that understand the business, understand what's being done. If there is something that you have doubts about, do I understand this well enough to seal this? Channel that, run that by colleagues, work that out, make sure that that's satisfied to a level of comfort that you're at. I think the other big one is this is again a rabbit hole that we could run down, but do have an understanding of what kind of liability your company is taking on in your contracts. I think, having a clear idea of what you're protected from, what are they saying about indemnification, all those different pieces. You should have an understanding of that, because there's a scenario, it's probably unlikely, but there's a scenario where you're going to have to be testifying before a court, or speak to something on cross-examination because there was a problem. And, you should have an understanding of what you're could be dealing with. And so it's not to terrify everyone, but I think you should certainly go in, eyes wide open, and not just assume, oh yeah, I can sign and seal and that's what everybody's doing, and that's just what I need to do my job. This has a legal meaning, and it is serious.
Yeah, I agree with that. Anybody else have any other thoughts?
Yeah, Jim, we talked a couple folks hit on the authority to make changes. The way I see responsible charge is that all changes need to go through me when I'm the engineer of record or the sealing engineer. And what that means is that regardless of our client, now granted, clients have subject matter experts. Oftentimes, they're going to provide input to whatever it is your project's goals are. You have to take their inputs into consideration because there may be things that you haven't considered on your end. You're also going to receive comments sometimes from the public or local governments. So you have to be able to manage all those inputs. But at the end of the day, those changes need to be made through you by your team. So granted, I don't spend most of my day doing CAD work, but the drafters that work on those projects are part of my team. They're not off site. They don't work for a different company, etc. And certainly, and I think maybe I'll lead us into a next our next couple of issues. But as a personal note, recently, as recent as last week, we ran into a situation on my team where we have a client that has their own file server. We upload project information to their server throughout the life of the project. And it came to my knowledge, this job was getting ready to be sealed. Came to my knowledge that somebody on the client side edited the CAD files and then sent us a PDF of those files with no red lines, no markup or whatever, and told me that they were ready for seal. So that is not responsible charge. I want to be clear about that. Changes suggested or required by somebody like a client, they need to be handled in a specific procedure to go back towards the team that has control over the editable files, where I can see what changes have taken place and I have the ability to archive all the comments, all the markups, and the evolution of that project.
Yeah, great point. And on this slide, we show what your stamp looks like. So mine's still in the box, right? But I have used it a few times. But we also have electronic stamps that we typically would use. I mean, there's wet seal, and then there's also electronic seal, and there's issues on both of those. I did want to say, Robert J. Smith, I do not think is engineer 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Hopefully they retired that number before they used this example, right? But there is that certification language that needs to go along with our seals. I hereby certify that these documents were prepared or approved by me and that I am a duly licensed professional engineer under the laws of the state of Maryland, license number, expiration date. So that is quite a statement that we put on our work. And this is, approval and integrity. I think we're getting to issues regarding professional integrity. Maryland, there are Maryland-specific requirements on amending the work signed by another PE, and maybe we can talk about that also. Controlling your seal, right? Who on your team has access to your seal? If you're doing electronic files, who are you giving access to use your seal on those drawings? So just general reactions to that approval and integrity. Does anybody have any thoughts?
So I'll just share, Jim, that their COMAR, which is the Code of Maryland Regulations, has really specific defined requirements for digital seals. And Andrew just got his digital seal. It was a really lengthy, time-consuming process because it does come with like a special key that's just for you. And so I would encourage folks, if you do plan to sign plans digitally, and not just, a stamp in Bluebeam or a stamp in Adobe, but like a real certified digital seal that's compliant with COMAR. Make sure that you start that before you plan to stamp the plans, because it did take like a week to get that done. But I think that, Karen and I, and the group had a good conversation when we were going through our trial run last week, just about working on big projects and how on a big project, an engineer can't necessarily see every single plan and how you're navigating that. So Karen, could you speak to that part of it?
Well, I think, you know, you have to have a certain level of trust in the other engineers and the other disciplines that are working for you or with you on a project. And I know that budgets and schedules often don't allow for robust, long review processes. But I think it's important to do as much of that as you possibly can, especially in these large, large treatment plants or pumping stations where there are a lot of moving parts. And again, that just the overall awareness, and then relying on your discipline specific experts to be well versed in their disciplines and what they're signing and sealing.
Yeah, and I think that one of the things, this has come up recently for us, just making sure that whatever your seal and signature is on, that you're comfortable speaking to. We had a zoning hearing 2 weeks ago where my seal was on a document. Andrew is the engineer of record. He was out on PTO. Heaven forbid an engineer take a week to go on vacation with their family. But he was out of office. I oversaw the preparation of a document that was included in an engineering document that was included in the package. My seal was on it. In this zoning hearing, even though Andrew is the engineer of record for the entire project, because my seal was on that document, I ended up being the person that was sworn in as an expert witness and that testified to the preparation of that document. So I think, take that lesson learned, that you need to be comfortable and prepared to speak to anything that your seal is on.
Yeah, and Victoria, now that you mention it, yeah, I had a project similar to that where I was the engineer of record. There was a structural issue, but it wasn't our structural subconsultant sitting in that seat being questioned by the contractor's attorneys. It was me. And that's a position I hope never to be in again, because it's very uncomfortable. But I think another point to be made is firms carry professional liability insurance. And when something arises that could possibly lead to a claim, even if it never does, the right thing to do is to make sure that people at your firm are aware, because you can submit what's called a pre-claim status to your liability insurer. That got us access to claims experts, to attorneys, to help us frame our arguments and our responses. It came at no cost to Whitman Requart, and it was just very beneficial in the end. So I think a lot of people hesitate and say, oh my gosh, it's like car insurance, my rate's going to go up, I don't want to tell anybody about it. But it's absolutely the right thing to do, to bring that to people's attention and to get the sort of the expert backup that you need for something like that, because hopefully you're rarely, if ever, in that kind of a position, but the people who do that for a living can be very, very helpful.
And I see on cue, Mackenzie dropped in the chat box for everybody a plug for the upcoming Maryland Society of Professional Engineers conference. If you are sitting here listening and you're like, what's a pre-claim? What's professional liability insurance? Or how do I get my butt out of trouble? We have 2 different insurance brokers, and we also have an attorney that are coming, and they're going to be speaking in the professional liability or the professional practice track of our conference. So there's going to be a lot of good content there, and I would encourage folks to attend to learn more.
Better to hear about it before you need it.
Yes, that's a great point. And it is, when we're studying engineering and when we're getting our license, we may not be aware of liability insurance. And even if you're doing your own work, maybe you're a structural engineer and you're doing barns or whatever for neighbors or friends, there is insurance for you individually called errors and omissions insurance. So not only firm insurance, which you're typically protected under if you work for a firm, but also if you're doing your own freelance work, that is a really good idea. Not that we're giving any advice here, but it's good to find out as much information as you can about liability. Let's see the next slide here. So I think this is kind of in the vein of modifications to the original engineering plan, either your design or if you're picking up a project from another engineer or engineering firm. Have you seen designs modified without your consent? What do you do? So let's see. Bobby, do you have any thoughts on this issue?
Yeah, well, I think I kind of just hinted at that a few moments ago. It's just making sure that you can establish kind of a normal procedure for how edits are identified and communicated to the team and then made and archived. So I would encourage people to consider at the beginning of a project, take the time up front to figure out how you're going to maintain organized files. It's okay to have multiple versions as long as you have an archive. Get concurrence from your team on, make sure that they're aware of what's the correct version. Use your timestamps. Compile all your archived markups. I come from a company that probably has more procedures than it needs. So I'm just used to following procedures and trying to instill that on my team now.
And what about changes maybe during construction? I think that's a fairly common thing that would happen, right? The crew has been hired to build something, and they go out and they see that there's a condition that maybe wasn't taken into consideration in the design. It just was an unknown.
Right. And that's a great point, Jim. Sorry. In the utility world in which I operate, and I know you do as well, usually the engineering firm that designs the facility or the utility is not always involved in construction. Usually we're on contract for design services. We collect a package of jurisdictional permits and an approved design, and it goes out to the field. It's built by a separate qualified entity under the supervision of the client. So there's a couple different things that can happen. One of which is really common in the utility world, are just routine alignment changes. There are specific or owner specific procedures around now what maybe constitutes a reseal or a review by the engineer, and other things which can proceed. So like something like, okay, we changed the quantity of an item, or like we made an alignment change and we added some 45-degree and 90-degree elbows. Okay, that's probably something that doesn't really rise to that level, in my opinion. But if somebody makes a material change, like a means of construction, they change the depth versus something like an approved directional drill plan, or they move into an area that was, maybe something looked weird on the plan sheets and the contractor complained, but we made a change to avoid a specific tree or a wetland buffer. So there's things that do need to be passed by, but that don't always rise to the level of requiring a reseal.
Bobby, I also think it's important that we add in, when we were talking last week, you quote said, "There's no price for a stamp." And if I could impress anything on the group today, I think that that's one of the big takeaways here, is if you have someone calling you and saying, "Hey, can you stamp this?" your answer should probably be no. Probably definitely be no. I don't want to be absolute about most things, but no, it should be no. So you need to make sure that you've had oversight of the work that has happened. You know, Karen referenced the changes that have been happening at the state level and at the county level, where folks who are in directors of engineering, directors of permitting, directors of public works type positions, in order to fill those roles because of labor shortages, the jurisdictions have been peeling back the requirement of a PE. I mean, making sure that if you're seeing those people are writing over your seal and redlining plans over your seal, that you're elevating that concern, you're raising that concern, you're going back to that person and correcting that they can't, you know, as a non-PE, they can't write over your seal or can't modify your designs as you're the engineer of record. I think, you know, bringing that to folks' awareness is important.
Jim, I know we're probably coming up a little short on time here, but a couple of just 2 points to piggyback off of that. One would be, just as I think it'd be remiss not to mention, if you are working over another engineer's sealed work, you're legally required to notify them and give them a copy of the plans that you've changed. And so there's different methods for that, but I've had scenarios where there was an old plan that was sealed, it was 10 years old or more, and then we needed to modify a BMP, and so you have to be very careful about being clear, like what you're sealing and taking responsibility for. What was the previous engineer's work? I think that's just something to for awareness. The other best practice, which is sort of adjacent to this, is be very mindful of what you are putting your seal on. I know we touched on this earlier, but I've seen practices where it's like maybe your seal and signature are in CAD, which may not be a great idea, and that's just automatically getting put on every title block, and every plan has now got your seal and signature on it. While that's not the same as like a data verified digital signature, it still can create a lot of problems when you're putting your your signature and seal. You're not having control over that, and so I would certainly advise everyone here, be really mindful of who has access to your digital seal, who can seal draw. You really need to make sure you have control over that.
Yeah, great point. I agree with that. I'm gonna go right to some important links here at the end of the presentation. The first link is to our Board of Licensure, which is the body that controls our licenses. So any complaints would go to the board, and also they approve new licenses. The law, there is from the Department of Labor, there is a 1-hour ethics exam. It's free, and you get a PDH credit for that. So there's a link for that, and it's also very informative of what's in the ethics regulation. And then COMAR, Code of Maryland Regulations, these sections control the engineering licensure process. Take a look at our website, Maryland Society of Professional Engineers, mdspe.org. We definitely want you to join us. If you join National Society of Professional Engineers for about $300, you automatically become a member of Maryland Society of Professional Engineers, and also a local chapter. And we have 2 very active local chapters in Maryland. A plug for our annual conference is coming up on Thursday, October the 12th. If you use this discount code webinar 2023, you can save $25 when you register for the conference. Check out the full lineup of speakers on our website. And I think that brings us to exactly 1 o'clock, and this would be the end of our webinar. We really appreciate you joining us today and listening to our conversations. I knew we wouldn't get to questions having this only be 1 hour, but Mackenzie is our administrator. And if you send Mackenzie an email, mgarrity@mdspe.org, she will triage that question and get it to one of us, and we'll answer any questions you may have. So on that note, I would just like to thank you again for attending. I'd like to thank the panelists, my cohorts in the Maryland Society of Professional Engineers, my friends and colleagues. I want to thank you very much for participating today. I think it was a lot of fun for me, and hopefully it was a lot of fun for our audience as well. So thank you very much, and have a great day, everybody. Take care.
Thank you.